सर आपकी वॉइस नहीं आ रही है।
Okay, so let us start with object for the class that is a student. We are trying to start with constructor, and constructor in Java will try to understand how it works in Java. The constructor is common to all different types of object-oriented languages. In C++ also we have constructor, although the C++ way of constructor is an old method. Similarly, we have constructors in .NET languages like C Sharp, VB.NET, C Hash.NET. So we'll be covering constructor with a modern way, how it is declared. But before we move on to constructor, I just want to show you why constructor is required and what is constructor. So we have a class student, and this student class, we have a roll number that is initialized to 1. We have a name that is initialized to Raj. And then we have a show function. This show function prints the value of roll and name. Now coming to the main function, public static void main. Now this is a main function. Here we declare two objects, two students. Student S1 equals to new student, and then we have another object, a student S2 is equals to new student. And then we print S1 dot show. And then we print S2 dot show. Just to see what happens when we run this program. So if I can open a notepad just to show you how it works, you can see here that in the S1 object, we'll have a variable role and we'll have a variable name. And this role will have value of 1, and this name will have a value of Raj. And similarly, another object S2 is created, and this S2 object also has role is equals to 1 and name is equals to Raj. So if we print this S1.show and S2.show, we call this function, it will print the roll number is 1, name is Raj for both the objects. Let us check it out. Here you can see that roll number is 1, name is Raj, roll number 1 is name is Raj. Why it is happening? Because we have initialized the variables in the class itself. So when we initialize the variables in the class itself, what happens is all the object that we create, all the object that is created will have the same value. But if all the objects of the class will have same value, it will not make any sense to have two objects because both the objects are exactly same. So what we need to do here is that whenever we are creating the object at that time, we want to pass some value so that each object has a different identity. Each object variables have different values. So we will not initialize here. We'll declare here. We'll declare here. And then what we will do, we'll create a function. The name of the function will be same as that of the name of the function will be same as that of the class. And here what we do, we are creating two functions. Why we are creating two functions, that also I'll make you understand. Now here we'll have a value R coming for roll number, and for name we'll be using NM. So now roll value will be assigned the value of R, and name will be assigned the value of NM. Now see here, when we create the first object, we'll pass the roll number as 1 and name as Raj. And when we are creating the second object, we'll pass roll number as 2 and name as suppose Ravi. So now what is happening is when the two objects are created, the first object will have this role and name that is we are transferring will be accepted here in the function on line number 8. And from there, this will be assigned to the variable of the class role. So first object will have 1 and Raj, and second object will have 2 and Ravi. So in this way, multiple objects of a class will have different values. Now let me run this program and let us try to see what happens this time. Now you can see roll number 1 Raj and 2 Ravi. We have two different values coming for each of these objects. So this function that initializes the variables of the class, the function which initializes the variable of the class so that each object gets different value, is called constructor. So this function is basically a constructor function or a constructor. So what is a constructor? Constructor is a function that initializes the objects at the time of declaration. Now here we call the constructor. This is the constructor which is called automatically at the time when we are creating the object of the class. We cannot call this function later on. It is only called when we are creating the object of the class. Plus it has some more features, like the name should be exactly same as that of the class name. It should be matching as case sensitive match. If S is in capital, here also S has to be in capital. And then we do not have any return type, not even void. Like in show function, when this function is not returning any value, we declare void, but constructor function will not return any value. So this is the basic purpose of constructor. And a constructor which has some parameter in it is called parameterized constructor. And the constructor which does not have any value in it, this is called the default constructor. So a constructor can have some value, a constructor may not have some value. Then this type of function is called a default constructor. And what is the purpose and use of a default constructor? We'll try to understand soon. Now I'll try to give you some definition of constructor. So if we try to define constructor, then what is a constructor? So we'll cover different points in it. Basically, constructor is a function. So constructor, what is a constructor? Constructor is a function which initializes the class member variables. This is the basic definition of a constructor. What is a constructor? Constructor is a function which initializes the class member variables. Why it is required? We use constructor to give, that is assign different values to the objects. Otherwise, all objects will have same value if we do not use constructor. Now, constructor has some more fun features in it. Constructor should not be private. What is private, we'll discuss. But constructor should not be private. It has to be publicly called. Name of constructor should be same as that of the class. Class name and constructor name should match. Then it does not return any value. Any value. It will not return any value. Important thing is that not even void. We do not have to mention that it does not return a value. And then there can be multiple constructors there can be multiple constructors in a class. One constructor that is the default constructor should always be created. Otherwise, the compiler will have to create a default constructor for us. So a default constructor is required. And constructor with parameter is called parameterized constructor. Constructor without parameter is called default constructor, and multiple constructors in a class is also function overloading. When we have more than one function in a class by the same name, it's called function overloading. And last but not the least, that it is automatically invoked, called when we create object. We cannot call it like other function, like we can call show function as many times as we want, but we cannot call the constructor function. It is automatically invoked when the object is created. So let us recap once again. Constructor is a function which initializes the class member variables. We use constructor to assign different values to the object. Otherwise, what will happen? All the objects will have same values. Constructor cannot be private function of a class, and name of the constructor should be same as that of the class. It does not return any value, not even void. There can be multiple constructor in a class, and there should always be one default constructor in every class. Otherwise, the compiler will have to create for us. Then constructor with parameter is called parameterized constructor. Multiple constructor in a class is also an example of function overloading. It is automatically invoked when we create object. Now, this is one example of a constructor that we have seen. Now, let us see why do we create a default constructor. So I'll not use this. Instead, I'll copy it. Another example that will be example 2.java, and in example 2.java, I'll show you how and why we need a default constructor. So many times what will happen that suppose we are creating an object, but we do not want to assign the value when the object is created. We want to create it like this. And later on, we want to set the value for this constructor, for this object. So if we create the object like this, then you can see that in this situation, S2 object values will be empty. It will not contain any value. So later on, we can have a function void set info, or it can be any name. And with the help of set info, we can set the values of the constructor. So the set info function can have the parameters, and then these values can be initialized. So if we want to create an object, and at the time of creation, we do not have the values to supply, we want that later on when the values will be available will be initializing the values. Suppose we are creating an account in a bank, and at the time of creation of the bank account, we do not have the account number because it requires a lot of formalities to be done. So our account gets created, the record gets created, and later on, as soon as the values will be available, it will be uploaded or set. So here we can set the value later on s2 dot set info. So if we want to create the object, but we do not want to supply the values because the values will be supplied later on because of some reason, then therefore, we need a default constructor. A default constructor will be created. So at the time of default constructor, when the default constructor is created, it will have empty values, and later on we can assign values with the help of some function. So this is how we can have a use of default constructor. So every class must have a default constructor so that the values are empty, and later on it can be populated as and when it is required. So in this function, in this program, if we run the program, you can see that it will have two values printed, one for the first object and one for the second object. Okay. No such method set info. What is the issue? There's one error here coming. Why the student dot set info? Let's check. Since we already have a student class in this folder, it is not creating. So we have changed the name to student2 so that it will not have any issues. Now you can see that the object has been created and it is running with different values. So this is how we make use of default constructor. Okay, I hope you're getting the point. So constructor is a function. We can have a default constructor. We can have a parameterized constructor. Constructors will not be invoked later in the program. It can only be invoked at the time of the object declaration. We can call functions later on and use the values in the object as it is required. Coming to another example, we have a class called room, and we have a class called building. So in a building, there will be different rooms. So this is a default constructor. When we will not supply any value at the time of creating the object, it can contain the default values. The default values of room can be 15 by 10. Then if we pass only one value, it will be of a square shape room. Then we have a room with length and width assigned. Then we have a show size, which will show the length and width of the room. So we are creating first object. So in the first object, what will happen? Let us see how the first object is getting created. Now we have room 1. This room 1 will have length and width. Similarly, we'll have room 2. This will also have length and width. Similarly, we'll have room 3. We are creating three rooms. So each room will have its own dimensions. In the first room, that is room 1, if you see, we do not pass any value. That means the default constructor will be called. So when we call the default constructor, the length and width of that room will be 15 by 10. So it will be 15 and the width will be 10. In the second case, what we are doing, we are creating a room and we are passing only one value. So when we pass only one value, the length and width will have the same value. So room 2 length and width will be 15 and 15. Since it is only one value that is being passed, so we are assigning it the room. The different sizes for each rooms will be printed. Let me run the program. You can see room 1, room 2, and room 3. All the rooms have got different values. So in this way, we can print the values and we can make use of the constructor function. So this is the room class creating 3 objects, room 1, room 2, room 3. All these rooms will have different dimensions. The first room has been assigned with the default values for the dimension. The second value has 15 and third value has 20 and 15. The rooms values being assigned here. So this is how we can make use of the constructor. Now there is one more type of constructor that is called the copy constructor. So I'll show you here only the copy constructor. So in the copy constructor, what will happen? Suppose we have a room, a new room that is being created, and the new room should be of the same dimension as one of the previous rooms. So we'll not pass length and width, instead we'll pass the object which has to be copied. So the length of the new room will be the length of the room that is already existing, and width of the room will be equals to which is already existing. So now if we come here and suppose we are creating the room object room 4 equals to new room, and here in the constructor we are not passing dimension, instead we are passing one of the objects. Suppose we pass the object of room 2. So what will happen? The room 4 will have the same dimension as that of room 2. If we pass here room 3, so it will have the same dimension as that of room 3, because this constructor takes the object and then copies the length and width. The new room length and width will have the same dimension as that of room 3, because room 3 is passed here. Room 3 will be copied here in line number 16 as a parameter, and then so in a copy constructor, an object is passed as a parameter. This is a copy constructor. And in the copy constructor, if we define, we pass object as parameter, and this object values are copied to the new object. So the new object will have the same values as that of the previous object that has been created. And now if we print room 4, if we can show you room 4 dot show size, we'll see that room 3 and room 4 will have the same dimension because we have passed as a parameter. So here you can see that room 3 and room 4 has 20 by 15 and 20 by 15. So this is how we can make use of the copy constructor. So there can be different types of constructor. First is the default constructor where we do not have any value. Then a parameterized constructor with different parameters in it. Then a copy constructor that copies the object that is already existing to the new object that is being created. And so we have seen some definition. We have seen why constructor is required. If we do not have constructor, then all objects will have the same value. That is why we have to create constructor, and then there are different sort of points which we need to remember regarding constructor. And this concept and this syntax that we have learned in Java, this same very syntax will be used in .NET programming languages. If you study .NET and all new modern languages that are coming. All new languages have the same very form of syntax for constructors. So try to practice this. I'll share the programs that have been discussed today in the session and the points as well, so that you can practice it and we can see how we can use them in coming sessions. Thank you very much.